Hi there, I'm here in St. Henri on a beautiful October afternoon to tell you a little bit about a crime story that I find pretty interesting. But first, a bit of context about this area. I'm on Notre Dame, just west of St. Remy. So Notre Dame, of course, is a pretty interesting place. But what I'm going to talk about is from about 50 years ago, 1969. This whole area, St. Henri, was not quite what it is now. It was full of really very poor people, and that is confirmed in a report called the Charbonneau Report of 1971, which examined conditions of the poor in Montreal and concluded that it was pretty shocking what the people were living in especially in the southwest. You see that place across the street? That's what I'm going to be talking about over there. A place called Bar Robert Salon, which opened in 1969. But I'll get to that in a second. Just a bit more context. The poor were suffering from every type of bad thing back then in 1969, 71 or so. They were having their teeth pulled as babies. It's not just French people either. It includes Point St. Charles and English people from this area, southwest. So they were suffering disease, malnutrition, and one of the most famous cases of a family that were suffering all of these terrible things was the Dubois family, who came from a few blocks over there. They were on De Courcelles, not to be mistaken with Courcelles. De Courcelles is another north-south street in St. Henri. It's actually the same street as Lansdowne and Westmount. So imagine you got the amazing wealth of Lansdowne coming down to the poverty of De Courcelles, which is not as poor as it once was, thankfully. A lot of hipsters down in this area. So these brothers, I don't know, were there 9 brothers or something? Why there were so many brothers is another story. Of course, that's the whole revanche des berceaux. The priests were telling families to have as many kids as they could possibly have to boost the demographics against the English and so forth. So them having 9 children, sort of normal, even though it seems awfully bizarre now. And these brothers, the Dubois brothers, were a product of their environment. They were growing up on mustard sandwiches according to their own mythology, which they promoted through a journalist that got friendly with them. He wrote a book about them, telling their side of the story of all these things, but which was not that easy because the Dubois brothers were incredibly vicious people, and they really terrorized the city. And that's exactly what they did at this place over behind me, which seems to be discreetly called Bar Elena or something now. This building was empty for a very long time at 5090 Notre Dame West. It was abandoned for many years, but a guy named Robert Nantel had a dream of opening a strip joint, and that's what he did here. It was called Robert Bar Salon. In 1969 he opened it. And it actually took me a little bit of work to get his name, because later on he told his story at the Crime Commission in 1973, and it was an amazing story. It was just so over the top you'd almost not really believe it. So Nantel opened this place, and it was a success. But what happened soon after is flunkies from the Dubois brothers started intimidating him. They wanted $100 a month, I think, and 12% of all earnings. So Nantel said, "No, this is my place. I'm not going to give you anything," and rightly so. Why should he do that? So what happened is these guys, Dubois brother friends, Bertuccio and Martel, they started intimidating him. One thing they did is they showed up one day and kidnapped a bunch of employees, and they brought them to a field outside the city, put guns to their head like they were going to execute them, and then they just left them there. So that's about as scary as an experience as you can get. In fact, one of them, a lot of them just stopped showing up for work, so this of course hurt the business. And what you also had, I think there was a transsexual stripper, I researched this for another story, who was working here and was named Stripper of the Year. Her name was Saria, who was murdered along with another transsexual friend on Papineau in the East End, or one of those streets up there. I think that's an unrelated story, but I always found it interesting that firstly they would have a transsexual stripper, and then secondly that they would have Stripper of the Year, and thirdly that stripper was murdered, and who knows why, and the case was never solved, of course. This is Montreal. So here we got this place. We got this guy, Robert Nantel. Like I said, his name was kept secret. All of the 1973 reports just referred to him as Robert, Mr. Robert. And they didn't mention his last name, Martel, because they were still scared of what could happen to him. So the Dubois brothers wanted Nantel to sell the place to them, and he eventually relented and sold it for, I think they offered him $60,000, which by then, it was a very lowball offer. But anyway, he eventually had a gun to his head, so he was forced to sell, which is tragic. At the same time, these Dubois brothers were wreaking havoc across the city, but not necessarily so much in this neighborhood, even though this was their home turf. What they focused on were 2 bars on St. Lawrence Street. One of them was just a shocking, terrible story. They went to shake down a bar owner, a tavern owner on St. Lawrence, just below St. Catherine, and he wasn't going to give anybody anything. I totally respect this guy. And they said, yeah, you're not scared of us? Just look at the newspaper tomorrow morning and see what you're going to see. And so he opens up the newspaper the next morning, and what does he see? He sees that another bar owner a few doors down was murdered. So even in spite of that, that guy did not give in. He was even shot once and attacked many times. So that guy's story I have somewhere in my book. I don't remember the name right now off the top of my head, because that's not the story I came to tell. There's another story about the Dubois brothers, how they wanted to expand farther into the East End. So they focused on a very popular disco on Jacques Cartier Square called the Plexi. It was in one of those hotels on the west side. And what they did there was just insane. They put their own people in to sell drugs. They had employees fired. They beat one of the employees so bad he lost an eye. So that was a major fiasco. And the reason these stories came out is because of the Crime Commission of 1973. In fact, there were so many crime commissions throughout the 70s that they definitely shed light on a lot of these crime stories. Some of them are just incredible, just like unbelievable. So the Dubois brothers, I believe a few of them are dead. A lot of them are old and moved on. They were pretty much ended as a powerful force soon after. I think one of them was caught dumping a body in the Lachine Canal, and that pretty much was the end. But of course, the Dubois brothers still have far reaches in terms of they own things, and they're quite rich, and they live out of town and that sort of thing. So when you walk by here the next time, 5090 Notre Dame, just remember, I also should mention that during the course of all of this mayhem at the Bar Robert, there was an actual drive-by shooting. And I don't believe anybody was hurt, but it's one of the rare drive-by shootings in Montreal history. I met somebody at a party, at a dinner last year, who claims that he walked by and saw somebody just recently shot dead right in front of the place. Now, I was trying to ascertain the veracity of that story, because I don't remember seeing any news about a person who was actually shot dead, but they said they were there and saw the body still hot, and they're from this area and so forth. So I'm not sure if that particular part of the Bar Robert legend is true, but just remember this: we are living in a very peaceful time, and you should be thanking your lucky stars that things are better than they once were. The poverty, malnourishment, the general awfulness that were the conditions of society in places like this have all been improved. So we are living in a very peaceful moment now. So that's my story about Bar Robert, now apparently called Bar Elena, after being closed for many years. Oh, one other thing I should add, I'll kick myself if I don't mention it, is that after its time as Bar Robert ended in 1975, it became another strip club until the mid-80s. So in St. Henri, there was a strip club at this spot until like the mid-80s. I never went in, but I spoke to people who did, and it was probably, as you might expect, pretty lowbrow. So another last thing about strip clubs in Montreal, I did a compilation, informal compilation. I think there were 77 strip clubs on the island of Montreal in the late 70s, and now there's less than 20. So you see a whole general trend of this sort of establishment pulling up its roots and closing down and becoming something else, which I suppose may or may not be part of the progress of the world. But personally, illogical though it may be, I still have nostalgia for ages of dysfunction and mayhem and chaos. So these are the stories of Montreal. If you really find this stuff interesting, you should definitely buy my book, Montreal 375 Tales. It's on sale on Amazon, and it's in a lot of local bookstores as well. Okay, so I'm signing off. I hope you enjoyed this.